Captain Alex Reed stood in the command center of the human ship called Retribution. The ship was big and powerful, built for exploring the deep parts of space where no human had gone before. Alex had been a captain for 10 years, and he had seen many strange things in the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. The communications officer, Nina Torres, was sitting at her station when she heard something that made her stop breathing for a moment. A signal was coming through space, and it was not like anything they had received before. The signal was weak and full of static, but she could tell it was from aliens who were in terrible trouble. Nina turned to Alex and said the signal had been repeating for 3 hours. She had been trying to clean up the message and translate it into human language. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panel as she worked to make the signal clearer. The mathematics in the message showed that whoever was sending it was extremely frightened and desperate. Alex walked over to Nina's station and listened as she played the translated message through the ship's speakers. The voice that came through was not human, but the fear in it was something that any living being could understand. The alien voice was shaking as it spoke. The message said that something called the swarm was coming and that it was eating everything in its path. The aliens said they could not stop it and that their children were being consumed. They begged anyone who could hear the message to warn the rest of the galaxy and to not let the swarm reach other worlds. The message cut off suddenly, leaving only the sound of static filling the command center. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blake was the ship's weapons officer, and he quickly pulled up star charts on his computer. He told Alex that the signal had come from a place called the Kepler system, which was 47 light-years away from where they were now. This was in a part of space that humans had never explored before, and they had no idea what kind of aliens lived there. Blake's computer showed that the Kepler system had 3 planets, and 2 of them had cities and technology that could be seen from space. But as he looked at the readings, he noticed something terrible. The energy signatures from those planets were getting weaker by the hour. As if the civilizations there were dying, Nina was still working on her equipment when she found something that made her face turn pale. She told Alex that she was detecting massive biological signatures moving through the Kepler system. Whatever this swarm was, it was enormous and alive. The readings showed that it was bigger than anything they had ever seen before. Alex had learned about the galaxy during his years of space travel. Humans had been exploring space for 50 years since they discovered how to travel faster than light. In that time, they had met dozens of different alien species. Most of these aliens were friendly, but they all seemed to think that humans were dangerous and unpredictable. The reason for this was simple. Most alien species had evolved on planets that were safe and peaceful, but Earth was different. Earth was what the galaxy called a death world, a planet so dangerous that everything on it was constantly trying to kill everything else. Humans had evolved to be tough, aggressive, and hard to kill because they had to be in order to survive on such a hostile world. Blake looked at the data on his screen and told Alex that they were not equipped for a rescue mission. The Retribution was a survey ship built for exploring and studying new worlds, not for fighting wars. Their mission was supposed to be simple: map new star systems and report back to Earth about what they found. But Alex was not the kind of person who could ignore a cry for help. He looked around the command center at his crew of 43 humans. Each person on his ship had been carefully chosen, not just because they were skilled at their jobs, but because they could think clearly and act quickly when things went wrong. They were the children of Earth, and Earth had made them strong. Alex made his decision quickly. He ordered the navigation officer to plot a course for the Kepler system at maximum speed. The Retribution's engines were powerful, and they could reach the system in less than a day if they pushed the ship to its limits. Nina looked up from her station with concern in her eyes. She pointed out that the distress signal had stopped coming. Through 20 minutes ago. If this swarm was as dangerous as the aliens had said, then flying toward it might be suicide. The smart thing to do would be to return to Earth and report what they had heard, but Alex had already made up his mind. He told Nina that if the swarm was real and as dangerous as it seemed, then someone needed to find out what had happened and make sure it did not spread to other parts of the galaxy. There might also be survivors who needed help, and Alex was not going to abandon them without at least trying to help. The crew of the Retribution began preparing for the journey to the Kepler system. They checked their weapons, their shields, and their life support systems. Dr. Emma Walsh, the ship's scientist who studied alien life, began researching everything they knew about biological threats and how to fight them as the ship accelerated toward the Kepler system. Alex stood on the bridge looking out at the stars. He knew that they were flying toward something that had destroyed entire civilizations. But he also knew that sometimes the only way to protect innocent people was to face danger head-on. The Retribution was not just a ship. It was a weapon built by a species that had learned to fight for survival every day of their lives. Whatever this swarm was, it was about to discover what happened when it threatened something that humans cared about. The journey to Kepler would take 18 hours, and Alex used that time to prepare his crew for whatever they might find. They ran combat drills, studied the little information they had about the swarm, and made sure every weapon on the ship was ready for battle. As they traveled through space toward the unknown, Alex could not shake the feeling that they were about to face something that would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. But he also knew that his crew was ready for whatever was waiting for them in the Kepler system. The Retribution came out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, and what the crew saw made them feel sick to their stomachs. Where their sensors had detected 3 beautiful worlds full of life, they now found something that looked like a nightmare come to life. Dr. Emma Walsh stared at her readings and whispered that she could not believe what she was seeing. The biological mass readings were beyond anything she had ever studied. There were trillions of living organisms swarming through the entire star system, and they were all connected somehow, working together like parts of a giant creature. The main viewing screen showed what had once been the 3rd planet in the system. Alex remembered that their long-range sensors had detected beautiful crystal cities that sparkled like jewels from space. Now, the entire planet was covered in a dark, writhing mass that pulsed like a beating heart. The sight was so horrible that several crew members had to look away. Massive tentacles of living tissue stretched out from the planet into space. Some of these tentacles were reaching toward the system's star, as if the swarm was trying to consume the sun itself. Other tentacles were extending toward the 2 remaining planets, slowly wrapping around them like the arms of a giant octopus. David Kim, the ship's scanner technician, was studying his instruments when he found something that gave the crew a small amount of hope. He reported that he was detecting life signs on the 2nd planet, and there were energy discharges that looked like weapons fire. The people on that world were still alive, and they were fighting back against the swarm. Alex studied the tactical display on his command screen. The 2nd planet was half covered by the same dark organic mass that had consumed the 3rd planet. The northern half of the world was already gone, but the southern continent still showed signs of civilization and active defense systems. Blake ran calculations on his computer and told Alex that the defenders on the 2nd planet did not have much time left. At the rate the swarm was consuming the world, the remaining free areas would be overrun in about 6 hours. Maybe less. Nina was monitoring the communication frequencies when she detected another transmission coming from the 2nd planet. This message was different from the first one they had received. It was stronger and clearer, but it was also filled with the sounds of battle in the background. The voice that came through the speakers belonged to someone who called himself Commander Tal of the Hirani Defense Corps. His words were urgent and desperate as he warned the human ship to leave immediately. He said that the swarm could not be stopped, and that it consumed everything it touched, including matter, energy, and even thoughts themselves. Commander Tal explained that his people had been fighting the swarm for 6 months, and they were losing badly. He begged the humans not to let the swarm detect their presence and to flee before it was too late. The transmission was cut off suddenly by the sound of screaming and then silence. Blake was watching his instruments when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The long-range sensors were picking up movement from the main swarm mass. Dozens of smaller organisms were breaking away from the planet and accelerating toward the Retribution. even from this great distance. The ship's computers were trying to analyze what these things were. Alex studied the approaching objects on his screen and realized that they were unlike anything in the database of known alien ships. They were not quite machines and not quite living creatures, but something that combined the worst aspects of both. Each one was as large as a city block and moved through space in ways that defied normal physics. Alex ordered his crew to battle stations and told them to prepare for combat. Nina tried to establish better communication with any surviving Hirani forces on the second planet, while David worked to get a detailed analysis of the things that were flying toward them. Dr. Walsh was studying the biological readings from the consumed worlds when she made a discovery that horrified her. She called out to Alex that what the swarm was doing was not just killing and eating other life forms. It was completely restructuring matter at the molecular level, turning everything it touched into more of itself. The approaching scout creatures were now close enough for detailed scanning, and Blake's face went pale as he read the results. He told Alex that the creatures were partially made from Hirani technology and biological matter. The swarm was not just destroying the alien civilization, it was using the Hirani people and their machines as raw materials to build more of itself. Alex felt a cold anger building in his chest as he understood what they were facing. Throughout the galaxy, humans had earned a reputation as the species that never gave up. Where other races might try to negotiate or retreat when faced with overwhelming odds, humans had a tendency to fight with a ferocity that shocked everyone who witnessed it. This fighting spirit came from millions of years of evolution on Earth, a world where everything was constantly trying to kill everything else. Humans had learned to be aggressive, stubborn, and creative in their violence because those were the traits that kept them alive. The first scout creature was now within weapons range, and the crew got their first close look at the horror they were facing. The thing was a constantly shifting mass of organic tissue mixed with pieces of technology. Hirani neural networks pulsed with alien purpose, and fragments of their crystal architecture stuck out from its surface like broken bones. Alex could see that his crew was frightened by what they were looking at, but he also saw determination in their eyes. They were humans, and humans did not run from fights, especially when innocent people were depending on them. Blake reported that the weapon systems were locked onto the approaching creature and ready to fire. Alex looked at the nightmare on his screen and thought about all the Hirani people who had been consumed and turned into part of this abomination. Alex gave the order to fire, and the Retribution's main guns unleashed their fury on the scout creature. The weapons had been designed by humans, a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of destroying things that threatened them. The Retribution's main guns fired concentrated beams of plasma energy at the approaching scout creature. The weapons were designed by humans, a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to kill things that threatened them. The plasma beams struck the creature's organic hull and tore through its twisted flesh, exposing the horrible mixture of alien tissue and stolen technology inside. For a moment, the crew of the Retribution thought they had won. The creature seemed to stagger in space, its form writhing in what looked like pain. But then something happened that made everyone on the bridge feel sick with horror. The wounds in the creature's body began to close and heal. David reported that the creature was regenerating at an incredible rate. The damaged tissue was being replaced in real time, and within minutes, the scout looked exactly as it had before. The attack. The crew watched in disbelief as their most powerful weapons proved useless against this thing from space, but Blake was not ready to give up. He targeted the creature's center mass and launched heavy torpedoes armed with nuclear warheads. The weapons streaked through space and struck the scout creature's core, creating a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness around them. This time, the attack worked. The nuclear fire was so hot and destructive that it vaporized the creature's organic mass faster than it could regenerate. The scout was completely destroyed, leaving only scattered debris floating in the void. Alex allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the remains of the creature drift away. But his victory was short-lived. The long-range sensors showed that 11 more scout creatures were approaching the Retribution, and these new attackers had apparently learned from their companions' destruction. The remaining scouts began to spread out, making themselves harder to target with the ship's weapons. Their surfaces rippled and changed, developing what looked like thick armor plating. Dr. Walsh observed that the creatures were evolving in real time, adapting to defend against the weapons that had destroyed their fellow scout. Nina was working at her communication station when she managed to establish contact with a surviving Hirani defense station on the second planet. The aliens were amazed that the humans had managed to destroy one of the scout creatures. They explained that they had been fighting these things for 6 months without managing to kill even a single one. Blake looked up from his weapons console and told Alex that this made sense. The Hirani were a peaceful species whose idea of advanced weapons was probably what humans would consider crowd control equipment. They had never needed to develop the kind of destructive power that humans took for granted. The tactical display showed that the remaining scout creatures were using a new strategy. Instead of attacking directly, they were trying to surround the Retribution, moving in patterns that would make it impossible for the ship to escape. Their forms continued to shift and change as they adapted to the human weapons. Alex ordered evasive maneuvers and told Blake to maintain continuous fire on the creatures. He also ordered the weapons officer to rotate between different types of weapons to prevent the scouts from fully adapting to any single threat. What followed was a deadly dance through the emptiness of space. The Retribution had been built by humans, a species that had learned the art of war through countless conflicts on their dangerous homeworld. The ship proved to be far more maneuverable than the scout creatures had expected, twisting and turning through space like a living thing. Blake rotated between plasma guns, kinetic weapons that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds, and various types of explosive ordnance. Each time the creatures began to adapt to one weapon type, he switched to another, keeping them off balance and vulnerable. The human tactics were working. One by one, the scout creatures fell to the Retribution's weapons. But even as they fought, Alex knew that they were facing a much bigger problem. More scouts were detaching from the main swarm, and these new arrivals had defenses specifically designed to counter the weapons that had proven effective against their predecessors. Nina called out from her station that the Hirani were broadcasting an urgent warning. The aliens were telling the humans to stop fighting and leave the system immediately. Alex demanded to know why, even as Blake destroyed another scout creature with a well-placed missile barrage. The Hirani explained that every time the humans killed one of the scout creatures, the swarm learned from the experience. The collective intelligence of the swarm was studying human weapons and tactics, developing countermeasures that would make future battles much more difficult. By fighting, the humans were teaching the enemy how to defend against their attacks. Alex considered this information as he watched the newest wave of scout creatures approach. These latest attackers had armor and movement patterns specifically designed to counter human weapons. The Hirani had a valid point about the dangers of teaching the enemy, but they were missing something crucial about human nature. Humans had evolved on a world where everything learned and adapted. The predators that hunted humans became smarter and more dangerous over time. The diseases that infected humans developed resistance to treatments. Even the weather on Earth seemed to find new ways to kill people. But humans had learned to survive and thrive anyway. Alex told Nina to send a message to the Hirani survivors. He wanted them to know that humans came from a world where everything learned and everything adapted, and humans had learned to win. Despite this challenge, the key was not to avoid teaching the enemy, but to learn and adapt faster than the enemy could. The battle continued as more scout creatures arrived. Each new wave was more dangerous than the last, but the crew of the Retribution was also learning and adapting. They developed new tactics, found new ways to use their weapons, and discovered weaknesses in the creatures that they could exploit. Dr. Walsh was studying the debris from destroyed scout creatures when she made an important discovery. She told Alex that the creatures were not just learning from human weapons, they were also learning from human tactics. The swarm was developing the ability to predict and counter human strategies. Alex realized that they needed to change their approach completely. The traditional method of fighting would not work against an enemy that could adapt to anything they threw at it. They needed to think like humans from a death world, using creativity and unpredictability as weapons. The battle for the Kepler system was just beginning, and Alex knew that his crew would need to fight in ways that no civilized species had ever imagined. Commander Tal of the Hirani Defense Corps watched in amazement from her command station as the strange human vessel continued its impossible battle against the swarm. Her people had fought these creatures for 6 months, using every weapon and strategy they could think of, only to watch their attacks become less effective with each passing day. The swarm learned from every encounter, developing defenses that made conventional warfare completely useless. But these humans seemed to operate under completely different rules. They fought with a creativity and ruthlessness that her peaceful species had never developed. As she watched, the human ship used the wreckage of a destroyed scout creature as a shield, then launched a surprise attack from an unexpected angle. When the swarm began to adapt to this tactic, the humans immediately abandoned it and tried something completely different. Tal's subordinate officer, Kren, asked how the humans were managing to continue fighting when the swarm should have adapted to their weapons by now. Tal studied the tactical display and realized that the humans were not just fighting the swarm, they were fighting the very concept of adaptation itself. The humans seemed to understand that in a battle against an enemy that could learn and change, the key was to never let the enemy predict what you would do next. They fought with a level of unpredictability that made adaptation difficult and sometimes impossible on board the Retribution. Alex was proving Tal's assessment correct. He asked Blake about their ammunition status, and the weapons officer reported that they were down to 60% of their conventional weapons. But Blake had developed an idea that made him smile in a way that would have frightened most civilized species. Blake explained that the scout creatures had learned to defend against their missiles by adapting their armor and movement patterns. But the creatures adapted to the weapons themselves, not necessarily to how those weapons were used. The swarm expected missiles to be fired directly at them, so they had developed defenses against direct attacks. Blake suggested that instead of firing missiles at the creatures, they should use the missiles in a completely different way. They could release armed torpedoes into space and set them to explode when the creatures came near. The scouts would fly into these traps because they were adapted to defend against direct hits, not against turning space itself into a minefield. Alex immediately understood the brilliance of this plan and ordered Blake to implement it. The Retribution began laying a minefield of armed torpedoes in the path of the approaching scout creatures. The weapons were set to detonate when the creatures came within a certain distance, creating a deadly trap that the swarm had never encountered before. The scout creatures, having adapted to defend against direct missile attacks, flew straight into the minefield. The explosions tore through their formation, destroying several creatures and severely damaging others. The swarm had been caught completely off guard by this new tactic, but even as they celebrated this victory, Dr. Walsh made a disturbing discovery. She had been analyzing the debris from destroyed scout creatures and found that they were not just learning from human weapons, they were also learning from human tactics. The next wave of creatures would be prepared for indirect attacks and trap-based strategies. Alex studied the long-range sensors and saw that the main swarm was sending dozens of new scout creatures toward them. These new attackers were moving in patterns that suggested they had learned to expect traps and ambushes. The element of surprise had been lost, and the humans would need to find new ways to fight. Alex decided it was time to change the game completely. He told Ninia to send a message to all surviving Hirani forces throughout the system. He wanted their help, but not in the way they might expect. Instead of asking them to fight alongside human forces, he was going to teach them how to fight like humans. Over the next hour, Alex and his crew transmitted everything they knew about unconventional warfare to the Hirani survivors. They taught them about guerrilla tactics, about fighting dirty, and about the importance of being unpredictable in battle. The information included lessons on using destroyed equipment as weapons, turning manufacturing facilities into traps, and fighting with the kind of desperation that came naturally to humans. The Hirani, despite their naturally peaceful nature, proved to be quick learners when their survival depended on it. They had been fighting a losing battle for months, and they were ready to try anything that might give them an advantage against the swarm. Soon, the remaining Hirani defense stations began implementing human-style tactics. They used their own destroyed ships as improvised weapons, launching them at scout creatures like massive missiles. They turned their manufacturing facilities into explosive traps, luring the swarm into areas where they could be destroyed by carefully placed charges. Most importantly, the Hirani began fighting with a level of creativity and unpredictability that the swarm had never encountered from them before. They abandoned their traditional military doctrine and embraced the chaotic, adaptive style of warfare that humans had developed on their dangerous homeworld. David reported that the new tactics were working. The swarm was having trouble adapting, because both the humans and the Hirani kept changing their approaches. They were learning to fight unpredictably, making it impossible for the enemy to develop effective countermeasures. But Alex knew that this was only a temporary solution. The swarm was vast and powerful, and it would eventually find ways to adapt to human tactics as well. They needed a permanent solution, something that would destroy the swarm completely before it could spread to other star systems. Alex asked Blake about the status of their most powerful weapon, something called the Nova Cannon. Blake's expression grew serious as he explained that the Nova Cannon was designed for destroying asteroids and space stations, not for use against planets. If they fired it at the second planet where the swarm's main mass was located, it would sterilize the entire world. Alex pointed out that the planet was already lost to the swarm. The organic mass had consumed most of the world's surface, and the remaining free areas would be overrun within hours. If they could destroy the swarm's primary mass before it finished consuming the second planet, they might be able to save what remained of Hirani civilization. The Nova Cannon was humanity's most powerful weapon, a device that could crack planets and destabilize stars. It was the kind of weapon that only a species from a death world would think to build, designed for situations where absolute destruction was the only viable option. Alex gave the order to charge the Nova Cannon. The weapon would take 30 minutes to reach full power, and during that time the swarm would continue its relentless advance. The surviving Hirani forces would have to hold the line using their newly learned human tactics until the weapon was ready to fire. As the Nova Cannon charged, Alex reflected on what they were about to do. They were going to destroy an entire world to save the people on it. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, but it was also the only way to stop the swarm from spreading to other systems and consuming more civilizations. The Nova Cannon needed 30 minutes to charge to full power, and during those 30 minutes, the swarm continued its relentless advance across the surface of the second planet. The surviving Hirani forces, now fighting with the brutal tactics that humans had taught them, managed to slow the enemy's progress, but they could not stop it completely. Nina received final messages from the planet's surface as the last free cities fell to the advancing organic mass. The Hirani commanders were sending their final reports, and many of them included thanks to the human crew. They said that they finally understood why the rest of the galaxy both feared and respected humans. The humans had shown them that sometimes survival required embracing the very qualities that civilized species tried to suppress. Alex watched the tactical display as the situation on the planet grew more desperate by the minute. The organic mass now covered 90% of the world's surface, and massive tentacles were reaching toward the system's star. The swarm was apparently planning to consume the sun itself, which would give it enough energy to spread to other star systems and threaten countless other worlds. Blake reported that the Nova Cannon was fully charged and ready to fire. His voice was steady, but Alex could see the concern in his eyes. At their current range, the weapon would sterilize the entire planet. If there were any survivors still hiding on the surface, they would not survive the blast. Alex understood the weight of the decision he was about to make. There might still be Hirani civilians alive on the planet, hiding in deep bunkers or underground shelters. Firing the Nova cannon would kill them along with the swarm, but if they did not fire, the swarm would consume the star and gain enough power to spread across the galaxy like a plague. Alex gave the order to fire. The Nova cannon discharged with a brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the system's star. The weapon's focused energy beam struck the planet's surface with the force of a stellar explosion. The planet's crust began to crack and burn as temperatures that rivaled the core of a star consumed everything in their path. The swarm's organic mass writhed and twisted as it was consumed by the incredible heat. For a moment, it seemed as though even the Nova cannon might not be enough to destroy something so vast and adaptive. The swarm was so enormous that the weapon's devastating power was taking time to penetrate to its core. Then, suddenly, the entire planet convulsed. The swarm's network seemed to collapse all at once, with its various components losing coordination and beginning to consume each other in a desperate bid for survival. Dr. Walsh explained that the swarm operated as a collective intelligence, and destroying enough of the primary mass had disrupted their neural network. The process took several hours, but gradually the writhing organic mass that had been devouring the star system began to die. The massive tentacles that had been reaching toward the sun withered and broke apart like dead branches. The scout creatures that had been attacking the Retribution suddenly became sluggish and uncoordinated. David reported that he was detecting Hirani survivors in deep space. They were in emergency shelters and evacuation ships that had escaped the planet before the final assault. The news brought a mixture of relief and sadness to the crew of the Retribution. Alex asked how many Hirani had survived, and David's answer made the bridge fall silent. There were approximately 2 million survivors, which was all that remained of a civilization that had once numbered in the billions. An entire species had been reduced to a handful of refugees floating in the darkness of space. The Hirani survivors were asking to speak with Alex, and Commander Tal's image appeared on the main screen. Her crystalline features were marked by exhaustion and grief, but her eyes held a new understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. Tal thanked Alex and his crew for saving her people when they could not save themselves. She expressed regret that they had not been able to save more of her civilization, but Alex reminded her that they had saved what mattered most, the survivors and the future of the Hirani species. Tal asked Alex how he had known to fight with such ruthlessness and creativity. She wanted to understand how humans had developed such effective tactics against an enemy that had seemed impossible to defeat. Alex considered his answer carefully. He explained that humans came from a world where everything was constantly trying to kill them. The weather, the animals, the plants, and sometimes even the air itself were all potential threats. Humans had learned to fight because they had to, and they had learned to be ruthless because mercy was a luxury they could not afford. Tal's expression grew thoughtful as she processed this information. She said that the galaxy had always wondered about humans and their reputation for being dangerous. But she noted that, despite their fearsome reputation, the humans had risked everything to save people they had never met. Alex told her that this was also something humans had learned on Earth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was nothing at all. When innocent people were threatened, humans had a tendency to act, even when the odds were against them. As the Retribution prepared to escort the Hirani survivors to safety, Alex filed his report to Earth Command. The galaxy would need to know about the swarm and the threat it had represented. More importantly, they would need to understand the measures that had been necessary to stop it. The galaxy would have to learn that sometimes survival required thinking like a predator rather than prey. Sometimes it required embracing the very qualities that civilized species tried to suppress. The peaceful civilizations of the galaxy would need protectors, guardians who understood that the only way to preserve life was sometimes to be very good at taking it. In the depths of space, small fragments of the swarm drifted among the debris of the destroyed worlds. Most were dead, but some still maintained a spark of the collective intelligence that had once consumed entire civilizations. These fragments had learned something important from their encounter with humans. The swarm had discovered that there were species in the galaxy that were more dangerous than it was. There were beings that had evolved not just to survive, but to win at any cost. The fragments began to change their approach, becoming more careful and selective in their targets. They would avoid the regions of space where the Deathworlders lived, but Alex knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast and humanity was just one species among many. If the swarm returned or if other threats emerged, the peaceful civilizations would need protectors who understood the harsh realities of survival. As the Retribution jumped into hyperspace, carrying the last of the Hirani to safety, Alex made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Humanity would no longer be content to simply explore the stars. They would become the guardians of those who could not guard themselves. After all, someone had to be the monsters that other monsters feared, and humans, as products of a death world that had forged them in constant adversity, were uniquely qualified for that role. The galaxy might fear them, but it would also come to depend on them when the darkness came calling.